Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a build I'm calling the Poison Cloud Pummeler. This is a build that is a powerful honor mode build in its own right. It will be absolutely viable to play on honor mode, but is primarily designed to be both fun and extremely funny. This build is an update of one of my very oldest videos that I did, the Mighty Fart Druid, because this build is centered around trapping enemies inside of poison clouds and keeping them there while you beat them to death. This is, I find, an extremely funny and satisfying way to play the game, and shockingly powerful as you go through. There are very few enemies who can actually counter this playstyle other than by having pure immunities to what we're doing. And so as you go through, there are lots of enemies that simply cannot deal with what this character's doing, and the ones that can, you're still just an extremely powerful druid in your own right, so you'll have the tools to solve any encounter without any trouble, even if your gimmick gets turned off. This build gets very solid damage and excellent utility. You get most of the spellcasting power of a late-game druid, with more damage under most circumstances, and you get to shut down one or two enemies per fight just completely, rendering them absolutely unable to do anything. Most of the reason we're playing it, though, is that it is absolutely hilarious to play, so let's get building. I'm using Jaheira as the example character here because she's the druid of the party, and this is primarily a druid build, but if you're building this as a custom character, it mostly doesn't matter what race you pick, though races with dark vision will make some of the things that we're going to do just a little bit easier. There are plenty of sources of dark vision in the game, though, so that's not something that you really need to stress about, but it will mean that you won't have to go out of your way to find some source of dark vision to equip on your character. We're actually not going to start with a druid level because we are going to be multi-classing, and the first level that we're going to take is actually a level of Paladin. The reason for this is that if we start with Paladin, we get heavy armor proficiency, which is going to increase our armor class overall, and that's obviously really nice. And it just gives us a lot of extra utility at early levels because we can take Oath of the Ancients Paladin and have really solid healing at early levels. Oath of the Ancients Paladin gives you Healing Radiance, which is a very powerful ability for the first few levels of the game and will definitely help keep your party alive. So starting with Oath of the Ancients Paladin can increase the power level of our character significantly. For our ability point spread, we are going to not build like a paladin at all, because we have a very specific weapon and spellcasting setup in mind, and so instead, we are going to take 16 Constitution, 15 Dexterity, and 17 Wisdom. Now, it's also worth noting that this character benefits very strongly from getting Ethel's Hair, because that will enable us to hit 20 Wisdom. If we're doing that, then we can just take 14 Dexterity and put our remaining 2 points anywhere. It doesn't really matter where. Strength, probably, just for the extra carry weight. And then we'll use Ethel's Hair to hit 18 Wisdom, but it's not mandatory for the character. However, I do recommend it if it's something that you're planning to do in this run. For our skill selection, of course, it mostly doesn't matter, but if we can get perception from our background and if we can get perception from our background, then that will be very useful. Since we are going to be a druid build and have very high wisdom, perception is obviously excellent, so we would love to have that if possible. Other than that, we're not going to make any decisions at level 1, so let's move straight on to level 2. At level 2, we are immediately going to take a druid level, because one thing that you'll notice about this character is that we have 8 strength and 15 dexterity, or 14 dexterity if we're planning to get Ethel's Hair later on, and those are the stats that you usually use to hit things with weapons. So this character, up until this point, has not been excellent at hitting things with weapons. We can immediately solve this problem with the Shillelagh cantrip. In exchange for a bonus action, we can turn a staff or club into a weapon that does 1d8 base damage and uses our spellcasting modifier, in this case our high wisdom, in order to hit enemies, so it uses it both for attack and damage. The trick here with Shillelagh is that in the very early game, it gives you the best weapon in the entire game, the Humble Torch. A torch normally does 1d4 bludgeoning damage plus 1d4 burning damage if it's lit, but Shillelagh turns that into 1d8 bludgeoning plus 1d4 burning, and so the Humble Torch, when enchanted with Shillelagh, does the highest damage output of any weapon in the early game, barring the unique two-handed sword that you can get on the Nautiloid, and so will carry you through the early game in terms of damage output. It's also important that we level in this order so that our spellcasting modifier is correct for items and scrolls because of how Baldur's Gate handles spellcasting modifiers for that. So just make sure that you take your Paladin level at level 1 and your Druid level at level 2 in order to make those things work. For our cantrips, we are of course taking Shillelagh because I talked about that already, and then we're going to take Guidance because every party needs Guidance, and it is extremely useful to have this at this point. If you already have Guidance elsewhere in your party, you could take Produce Flame to give you a ranged option, or even Thorn Whip to give you a different ranged option, because that will actually come in handy later on, though we will be able to pick it up as we level up. So any of those options are possible, but of course Guidance is overpowered, so every party should grab it as soon as you can. For your prepared spells, like most druids, you're going to grab the 2 powerful utility spells, Longstrider and Enhance Leap. These are rituals. They don't cost your spell slots at all, and will allow you to increase your party's mobility massively. You're going to take Healing Word, because of course that is yet another powerful bonus action. So in turns of combat where you have already cast Shillelagh, you can use Healing Word to raise up downed allies, or just to provide a little bit of healing to a party member that needs it. And you're going to take Ice Knife just as your best default combat spell. This gives you a ranged combat option that can knock enemies over with the ice surface. At level 3, we are going to go back and take our second level of Paladin. This gets us access to Smites, which means that our damage output is now very, very high, because we were able to use Shillelagh to boost our torch damage, and then Smites alongside level 1 spells that we, the level 1 spell slots that we have access to boost it even further. We also get a fighting style, and there are 2 options for fighting style here. We can take defense to increase our armor class, which is very useful to this character because later on we are going to want to have the highest possible armor class to discourage enemies from attacking us or ensure that they miss when they do. Or as an alternative option, you can take protection. Protection fighting style is actually very good and, in my opinion, slightly underrated. And this character will be using typically a one-handed weapon and shield, so if you feel like you will be placing this character near other characters frequently, protection can be an excellent option for this character as well. By default, the best choice is defense, but protection is very powerful in a lot of parties, so definitely worth mentioning here. For our prepared spells at this level, we are mostly not going to be casting our Paladin spells. Now our spell slots are primarily going to be used for smites at this stage of the game, so we're unlikely to cast any of these spells, but you can pick up Bless because it's very powerful. You can pick up Thunderous Smite because it will allow you to deal just some extra bonus damage if you really need it with a smite attack, or you can take a day-long concentration spell like Shield of Faith, which is actually not a 0 for this character. Having 2 extra AC at this stage of the game can be very helpful, but any of those options will work pretty well. I like Thunderous Smite just because sometimes you need the burst damage. You can use this alongside another level 1 spell slot for a smite just to maximize your burst damage in a single attack. At level 4, we're going to continue our zigzag through the classes and go back to take another level of Druid. And the subclass for Druid that we're going to select is going to be Circle of the Land. This might look pretty unusual with a Paladin build, but Circle of the Land Druid gives us a few things that we will really want later on down the line in order to make the core strategy of this build work. The spell access and the class features of Circle of the Land play out extremely well, and of course Circle of the Land Druid is just a powerful thing to be already, so a Circle of the Land Druid who is now also a competent melee fighter because of our 2 Paladin levels is even better. We're going to get an additional bonus cantrip, and so we're going to pick up Thorn Whip. We will want this later on down the line because we will be creating a lot of hazardous terrain in various areas that we are fighting in, and so being able to pull enemies into that is extremely powerful. Thorn Whip is actually excellent utility for this character as well, since you will typically want to be fighting enemies inside of your hazardous fields, and so being able to pull them in there is great. For our prepared spells, we're just going to go ahead and it redid my prepared spells. We can add in something like Fog Cloud just as solid utility, or whatever else your party might need. Create Water is very useful if you have a party that makes use of that, and Entangle, of course, is an excellent spell just to prevent enemies from moving. Just a very powerful spell overall. We also get Wild Shape options, and don't neglect these, even though you are primarily going to be fighting in humanoid form with your Paladin Smites. Wild Shape options at this level are still really good ways to heal, because they provide you effectively a whole second hit point bar, and also to have additional movement modes in case you really need to get out of an area quickly. The ability to wild shape into an animal and just run away is actually a pretty powerful tool for an honor mode playthrough, so don't forget that you have that available. Circle of the Land Druid, it's sometimes easy to forget that you've got the wild shape options, but it's definitely a powerful option that will stand you in good stead. At this next level, we're going to continue to level in Druid, and we get our first Circle of the Land circle. The first circle that we're going to take here is going to be Underdark, because this gives us access to Misty Step, which of course is very powerful for every character, and especially for this one, which wants to be on top of enemies, hitting them as much as possible. It will be slightly less useful than for some other melee builds, because we do have to invest a bonus action into casting Shillelagh before we start hitting things, so you won't typically be able to Misty Step on the first turn of combat to get next to enemies. But later on down the line, you can still Misty Step and not use Shillelagh, and of course, in later turns of combat, Misty Step is still going to be invaluable. Web is also just a very powerful control spell at this point in the game, and we also get access to other level 2 spells, so we can increase the power of our character significantly. The most important of these is Spike Growth, even getting it at level 5, which is a little late to get access to Spike Growth, and if you really want this for early game fights, you could consider delaying your second Paladin level up to this point in order to get Spike Growth one level earlier. But Spike Growth just solos so many encounters because it will just completely trap enemies inside of it. They'll be taking a ton of damage. And of course, you can place it such that enemies cannot get away from you, and so you can keep hitting them with your powerful smite attacks, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. Trapping enemies so that they have a choice of either being stuck in melee with a devastating melee fighter or walking away from you over Spike Growth, triggering opportunity attacks and taking damage, is a very powerful tool for this character that will only get more powerful at subsequent levels. Other important spells to consider are Flaming Sphere, which is slightly less useful concentration than Spike Growth, but gives you a lot of additional options because it can distract enemies. They will attack it, and it will deal reasonable damage over time. And Moonbeam, even at this later level, Moonbeam is still just a very efficient damage spell if you can keep enemies trapped in it, and will come up a lot for this character, because at the next level, Druid level 4, we get our first feat, and even though we have these odd numbers, our first feat is going to be Sentinel. Sentinel is amazing for this character because it lets us effectively double our smites per turn under most circumstances. We can smite on our turn and then smite on the enemy turn when they either try to run away from us or attack an ally. And it gives us advantage on those opportunity attacks, which will allow you to do extremely powerful which will allow you to be much more likely to critically hit, which is, of course, invaluable for smite damage, and keep enemies trapped next to you in hazardous effects that we're going to be continuously layering on as we level up. This character, therefore, benefits a lot from Sentinel, so we're going to accept that we're not going to be able to even out these numbers for a little while, which is part of why this character benefits so strongly from Ethel's Hair, because at this point we could have 18 Wisdom, almost certainly, if we were using Ethel's Hair, which would just make us that much better at our attacks and damage, and accuracy is very important for this character. For a cantrip selection at this level, you can pick up Produce Flame if you feel like you really need a 30-foot ranged attack option, or you can pick up Resistance. There is likely to be a couple story events upcoming that will want you to make saving throws in dialogue, and Resistance can be very useful for those, so I recommend having that by the time you end Act 1, because it's very helpful throughout the end of Act 1 and Act 2. At Druid level 7, we get access to 3rd level Druid spells, which of course are extremely powerful, including several of the most powerful spells in the game, and we get to take even more of them because we get to take Circle of the Land bonus. What we want here is to take Underdark, because this build is going to make pretty heavy use of Stinking Cloud later on. The ability to prevent creatures from taking actions if they fail the Stinking Cloud save is going to be very powerful, and since we have Sentinel, we can trap enemies inside it quite easily. At this stage, we can use it by standing on the edge of the radius of the stinking cloud, and by moving up next to an enemy, and then placing the stinking cloud so that the edge of the radius just overlaps the enemy, but doesn't cover us, and then when the enemy tries to leave the AoE, we hit them with a sentinel attack, often trapping them still inside of the AoE. Now, sometimes enemies will still be able to just walk around you without leaving your threatened area, but if they try to back off from you to get out of the AoE, you'll be able to keep them trapped in it, which is very powerful. That's assuming they even pass the save and are able to take actions at all because they're going to be nauseated. We also get Gaseous Form, which comes up in some story events, but mostly is a non-entity, but we get to add in a couple more very powerful spells to our arsenal, in this case notably Sleet Storm and Plant Growth, more AoE spells that we can keep enemies trapped inside. You can also use Call Lightning at this stage. It's a very good spell for if you need to do some just some steady ranged damage, though if you're doing damage with your spells, you're usually going to want to just be making smite attacks, but Call Lightning gives you some options if you, for whatever reason, want to remain at range at this point in the game. At Druid level 6, we get the first class feature that makes this build really hum, and that is the Landstride Difficult Terrain ability that you get at level 6, Land Druid. Obviously, we've already been able to turn our spells into high-level smites, we've already been able to keep enemies trapped inside of effects, but Landstride for Difficult Terrain renders us immune to most of the dangerous effects that we are outputting. It makes you completely immune to your own Spike Growth, so you can walk with impunity on it, and your own Plant Growth, so you can walk with impunity on that. Picture walking up to an enemy, placing down a Spike Growth under the two of you, and then casting Shillelagh. That enemy either tries to fight you, in which case you've succeeded in your goals, or tries to get away, in which case you hit them with a sentinel attack for some smite damage. Then, on your next turn, you use Thorn Whip to pull another enemy into the snare, remaining dealing damage to them, because Thorn Whip does damage as you pull them over the Spike Growth, and keeping both enemies trapped inside because they will have to slowly crawl away. One of them you can hit with sentinel attacks, and the other's going to take damage, and then you can chase them down in the Spike Growth with impunity because your own Spike Growth doesn't slow you down or deal damage. All of these things together really let you shut down enemy movement completely, which can both save your more vulnerable allies and just stop enemies from being able to do what they want to do at all. Combined with decent defensive options on this character, shields and heavy armor, enemies will have no good options for how to spend their turn, and Landstride lets you produce situations where enemies simply cannot do what they want to do, and you can do anything that you want with extreme regularity. So all of that makes this build not only good at doing damage and shutting down enemies just like all Paladin or Druid builds are, but also extremely reliable at doing both because you're immune to your own effects in when you need to set those up. Character level 9, we hit Druid level 7, gaining access to 4th level spells, which improves the quality of our spell casting massively. The ability to cast 4th level spells for Druids is awesome. Druids are one of the very few spellcasters, I think in fact the only spellcaster whose best spells come at level 4 rather than level 3. So getting to this point means that our character has just gotten significantly stronger. We get access to two, not one, but two excellent summon spells, Conjure Woodland Being and Conjure Minor Elemental, both of which are great. Conjure Woodland Being is incredibly broken. We also get Ice Storm, which lets us set up even more hazardous effects on the field. This one not taking concentration, because we can create an ice surface without concentration. And we can use Grasping Vine as a bonus action to pull enemies into our hazardous surfaces without having to spend an action on Thorn Whip. Grasping Vine, since the rework, is actually quite good for this character because you are immune to the entangling effect of the Grasping Vine, so you can use, thanks to Landstride, so you can use it next to you. It sets up its own entangle, and it pulls enemies into hazardous surfaces or hazardous effects with pretty reasonable success rate, so you can use it to pull 2 enemies per turn, or pull enemies and then hit them yourself. Grasping Vine is actually really fun for this character. You also get Wall of Fire, a perennial favorite spell that just lets you solve certain encounters. There's a lot of encounters in the game that Wall of Fire just wipes, anything where enemies are coming towards you over like a narrow hallway or narrow surface. Although it must be said that this character is less likely to use Wall of Fire because enemies who are tightly packed in an area are food for you. You do not need to worry about having spells to solve that problem because you are so good at setting up poison clouds, hazardous surfaces, and trapping enemies in locations that they really don't want to be in. For our Circle of the Land ability, usually the pick here is going to be Underdark because it's the only one that has a spell that isn't normally on the Druid spell list, Greater Invisibility. But honestly, Greater Invisibility is just not a particularly important spell to this character. If you have a party mate who's using it, you might want to pick up Underdark. But for the most part, I think I'm going to recommend taking Arctic because that gives you 2 spells that you definitely are going to want. Or you can take Forest, which also gives you 2 spells that are very powerful. Grassland is okay. Polymorph is not going to be as useful. Arctic has the most generically applicable spells, though. You're likely to always want these prepared, so taking Arctic is going to be your best bet. And that just lets you prepare more different 4th level spells, so you always have the right ones available when you need them. So we can pick up like Grasping Vine and Conjure Woodland Being from our prepared spells, and then use our Circle to get Ice Storm and Conjure Minor Elemental to cover all of the spells that we need. At this next level, we get our second feat, and we finally get to even out these stats that have been bothering us this entire run. This is why I say that Ethel's Hair is so powerful for this character, because we could have had 18 Wisdom this whole time, and then be going up to 20 here, which would be a very respectable number. As is, this character is going to want, if you aren't doing Ethel's Hair, this character is going to want gear that increases your chance to hit and increases your save DC, because having only 17 Wisdom up to this point is definitely on the low end. While you can increase your save DC pretty easily through itemization, it will be important if you aren't using Ethel's Hair to do that so that you have relatively high save DC on your spells, though many of your best spells don't have saving throws at all. Incidentally, if you really want to amuse yourself, and you're watching this at least a few days after it was posted, you can scroll down and see how many people are furious that we took odd stats at the beginning, because they don't realize that you can't start with 3 16s, and that this is the highest you can get 3 individual attribute points. This is why we started with the odd numbers if you're not using Ethel's Hair, because we don't care about any other stats, so we'd rather just have the highest possible stats available to us. Other than that, though, no major decision to make. We're either increasing our dex to 16 and wisdom to 18, or we're going up to 20 wisdom if we used Ethel's Hair, which I do recommend doing again. So let's go on to level 11. At Druid level 9, we get 5th level spells, and we also get another Druid Circle here, and the Druid Circle that we are going to take is going to be Swamp. Swamp gets us Cloud Kill, which is yet another devastating, damaging effect. Cloud Kill, if you can keep enemies in it, is incredibly powerful. The difficulty is that enemies will often leave. Well, that's why we have Sentinel, and why we have Plant Growth and stuff like that, to keep enemies trapped inside of our Cloud Kill and continuously deal damage. And you also get Insect Plague, which, while it's not going to be a spell that you use that often, definitely does come up in some circumstances, but primarily for damaging AoE effects, you're going to use Cloud Kill. Insect Plague is a decent backup if enemies are immune to poison here. For our prepared spells at this level, there's only one other Druid spell that we really want to add to the list, and that's Conjure Elemental, which is of course incredible. Our 5th level spells are likely to be used for actually casting spells, because a 5th level spell slot is no better than a 4th level spell slot when it comes to smites. Both of them do 5d8 damage, so we can use the 5th level spell slots for Conjure Elementals and Cloud Kills, which enable our character to do a lot more damage while still conserving our lower level spell slots for smites to output melee damage as well as spell damage and control. But finally, at character level 12, we get the combo that really makes this build come online and reach the true potential for hilarity that it has in the extreme endgame, and that is that at level 10 of Land Druid, we get the Nature's Ward ability. Nature's Ward prevents you from being charmed or frightened by elementals and fae, which does nothing. That's not really an ability. But disease and poison no longer affect us. That means we can stand in our own cloud kills. It means we can stand in our own stinking clouds just fine. So we can stand on top of spike growths inside cloud kills, we can use both plant growth and cloud kill at the same time and be completely immune to the effects. Enemies trapped in there with us will be stuck forever inside the cloud kill because we have the sentinel ability, and even if they slowly inch their way out, you can reposition cloud kill to chase them down, while you yourself continue to chase them down. Cloud Kill also, at time of recording, is bugged, and if you lose concentration on it because of taking damage, you can recast it for free. So even though we're a melee character who's concentrating on a spell, we're never really at risk of losing our most important spell. So once you hit level 12, this character can walk up to enemies, drop down a Cloud Kill on top of both of you, and then cast Shillelagh, which conveniently uses your action, bonus action, movement, and concentration, making maximum use of your character's resources. And then when they try to run away, you hit them with a sentinel attack, using your last per turn resource, your reaction, doing another smite for even more damage for maximum effect. So the enemies will be taking cloud kill damage when you cast it, cloud kill damage at the start of their turn, smite damage when you attack them, smite damage on your reaction, and just continuously taking massive damage from this character while being unable to interact with you in any meaningful way. And you're immune to all of the effects of your own spells, so no matter the positioning, you can place this such that it will never cause a problem for you and keep enemies locked down inside of the most damaging effects in the game forever. For our cantrip selection at this level, you can just pick up Produce Flame so that you can set stuff on fire just in case you need that, but mostly what we're getting at this level is the ability to trap enemies inside of the Cloud Kill, locking them down in a Poison Cloud, and pummeling them to destruction. For items for this character, there are a few specific items that can really help take this character to the next level. While some of these items are somewhat in demand, they are items that are used incredibly well by this character, so I do recommend that you make space in your party for this character to use them. You're obviously going to want a staff, because you need staff or club, because you need a staff or club in order to make Shillelagh work. It doesn't work on other weapons. In the early game, that's going to be a torch until you start getting magical staves, and then later on, a great one is Nature's Snare, because Nature's Snare will entangle enemies, will ensnare enemies if you hit them with it, which you're going to be doing pretty regularly, and so that can help lock down enemies even further. They have fixed the bug with Nature's Snare where it used to apply the entangle on spell attack rolls as well, but this character will actually be melee attacking with your staves, and so that is going to increase the power of your character significantly. In the late game, of course, the best staff is going to be Markaheshkir, and that's excellent for this character because not only does it increase your chance to hit and your spell save DC, both of which you want significantly, you can also set it to poison to gain additional casts of Cloud Kill and additional poison damage, and so it synergizes incredibly with what this character is trying to do. So this is one of the better Markaheshkir users in the game. You'll probably want to pass it off to a character with level 6 spells so they can refresh their level 6 spell slot with the Arcane Battery before passing it back to this character to use all day, since this character doesn't actually have level 6 spells, but despite our level 6 spell slot. But Markaheshkir is just excellent for this character. You will also want the heaviest armor and shield that you can find. Increasing our AC is very important to this character because we want to discourage enemies from trying to attack us. In an ideal scenario, you walk up to an enemy, you drop down Cloud Kill, and you cast Shillelagh, all in the opening round of combat, and then that enemy looks at your very high AC and your impossible to hit stats and runs away. So you're going to want as the heaviest heavy armor that you can find with the highest possible AC, and the best shield you can find, ideally one that increases your spell save DC or your initiative rolls, because those are very important to this character as well. Another item that I really like on this character is the Cloak of Displacement, because you are unlikely to take damage from most AoE effects, and enemies will often be discouraged from attacking you if they have disadvantage, so the Cloak of Displacement not only can keep this character safe by giving enemies disadvantage on attacking you up until you take damage, it will cause them to decide to target a different party member, walk away from you, and then get trapped by your Sentinel attack to continuously take damage inside of your Cloud Kill. Another cool option for this character, although this is a little bit of a combo that all goes together, is you can use the Morning Frost as your staff of choice, alongside the Snowburst Ring to create ice surfaces whenever you hit an enemy, so they might fall over as well. But that does require you to have some way to become immune to ice surfaces, because your Land Stride ability does not stop you from slipping on ice by default, so boots that make you immune to ice are very useful for that purpose as well. So, mostly just to sum up, you want to increase your spell save DC as much as possible, your armor class as much as possible, and then secondarily, you want anything that increases your chance to hit, some specific gear, and initiative, just like every character in the entire game, will always want as much initiative as possible. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, of course, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm. And I hope that you enjoy trapping your enemies inside clouds of noxious fumes, because it is very funny to watch the enemies just completely unable to escape a cloud kill, just extremely powerful, and I think this character is both quite strong and extremely fun to play. Also very good solo, because the combo works very well even if you're on your own. And of course, if you've enjoyed the video, you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.